This is the Youth Soccer Evolution Podcast, episode number 7. Thank you again for joining us for episode 7. Today we had the pleasure of speaking with Tom Frambach, who is the general manager for Downtown United Soccer Club based out of New York City. You can find information on Downtown United at DUSC.net. We were lucky enough to get Tom on to come in and talk to us about player development and how his club is sacrificing trophies at the early stages in order to maximize player development. Tom was nice enough to come on and discuss with us his club structure and what they're doing to impact player development in New York City. Before we get into the show, I just want to remind you that if you like the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. It helps the show rank higher, and that allows others looking for the same information to find us. Tom, why don't you tell us first a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you personally, and then tell us a little bit about your journey as a player, as a young child, and how you got started playing soccer. And then tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the Downtown United Soccer Club.
Okay, so my journey through soccer really started at a young age. Started at the age of 5. Like most, parents signed me up for a class, and it was a recreational soccer league, and you really enjoyed it. Parents saw that I had a passion for it. I was enjoying playing. I guess talking with some of the coaches there, they started a travel program at U8. So at that point, they asked me if I wanted to join at U8, and since then I've been playing the game and loving the game since. And really through that journey was club soccer, which took me all over the country, all over the world. Played on a pretty competitive and high-level youth program, and then moved on to play college soccer at SUNY Cortland. Had an opportunity to be a player and a coach there. Following playing at Cortland, was seen by Octavio Zambrano at the time, who was the head coach at the Metro Stars, and had an opportunity, I guess you would call it a cup of coffee, to play in the pros. I was called up for a bit, never signed a contract, but got the opportunity to play with some amazing players. For me, once that was over, I think it was time for me to transition into the coaching environment. So my playing career was really an enjoyable one. I had a lot of coaches that were great mentors to me, that really gave me the passion to continue not only playing, but making a living out of it. And so that was kind of my pathway playing-wise.
Right. Thanks again, Tom, for sharing that with us. And I mean, it was kind of brief, but we'll get a little bit more into it. That way we can get to know you better and learn more about you. You definitely have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience in not only playing but coaching as well. So you said you started playing around 8, and then ever since you got into a club. How big was that club, and what do you remember that you liked about playing at a young age? Yeah,
it was. It wasn't a big club. It was a town club, a little bit north of the city, and for me, I didn't really understand the full club structure. For me, it was more just about the team itself. And I remember what I do remember is the parents really being involved in volunteering, giving back their time to make sure that we had the opportunity to play. There was a financial component to it, and be able to travel. As we got older, the travel became more drastic. We competed in our local leagues, but also went to tournaments across the East Coast. As I said, growing up in New York, we went to the Disney Showcase in Florida, to the San Diego Surf Cup, to the USA Cup in Minnesota. So really had some great experiences on the field, but also off the field. I think one of the lasting memories I have is sharing these experiences with the friends that were really friends for a lifetime that played on the team together. There was a core group that stayed together. As you got older, in most teams, the level starts to get more intense, and some players start to drop off, and new players come in, and we mold and shape together as a unit. But the core group stayed together, which for me, I think was a great experience because we shared a lot. So as I say, the experience for me was pretty rich. I did have some very good coaches. I think that were ahead of their time at that point. One was a German, a guy who came over, him and his son, where his son was on the team, and he really brought, I think, good knowledge to the game, and he understood not only the soccer side of it, but also understood the educational component that teachers really need. And so I think from him was a great foundation. And then we had Dominic Martelli, who is currently the head women's coach at Gwinnett College. He was at the time the assistant coach at West Point at Army, and he was our club coach through the high school years, and he helped take us really to another level. Had the connections with college coaches and networked through the soccer scene that brought us to some of these tournaments.
About what time was this when you were going through that journey as a player?
Well, this was in the 90s. So I graduated high school in 1996. The early 90s were really the time in which, early to mid 90s, is where that the club, from the club perspective, is where we started. It started to really grow. I then entered college in 96, 97, going to SUNY Cortland, and I played there. So certainly the youth landscape has changed dramatically since here in the U.S., and it's been interesting to see the developments of youth soccer in the U.S., coaching-wise, player-wise, and culture-wise.
And Tom, how often did you play outside of formal training hours with your team?
Well, it's interesting. At that point, soccer had a different perspective in the U.S. from most. I was lucky. The group I had really we stayed together. We were kids that were good in school, had a good head on our shoulders, and although there was many naysayers, those who were the typical American football players and who saw soccer as kind of a different sport, a girly sport, sometimes it was called, to be honest. But I think we were the kids that could deal with it. And for us, it was just kind of more of a joking kind of thing. But I think at the time, looking back, a lot of kids probably dropped off just from peer pressure because soccer wasn't a cool sport back then. And so I think now that perspective has changed a lot, and people realize it's not, and whatnot. So that perspective has certainly changed.
Yeah, definitely. I think I see your point, and I've seen it myself.
Well, and getting to your point is there wasn't much opportunity to play outside. I grew up in a suburban town, so there weren't kids playing on the streets. That core group that played, we were usually getting together to play in more of a structured environment. Sometimes during gym class we would go out and play, but there was less opportunity to play outside of the team environment.
Do you think that's changed though now? Well, are there more kids playing now?
I do. And being in New York City, I'm seeing it change a lot. I think kids are, and the kids that we've seen starting to develop more through our club are the kids that are not only participating in the 3-day-a-week training and the games in the weekends, but they're coming to the fields playing all day, every day. And, we run 11 weeks of summer camp. So we have from 9 to 5. And here's an example. So, the kids are playing 8 hours of soccer in hot New York City summer. And some of those kids, their parents come at 5 o'clock to pick them up, and they're there for another hour or two just playing. And those are the kids that are also, coming on a Saturday or Sunday we don't have matches, and they're coming to the fields or going into, finding a basketball court and they're playing. And I think those are the kids that the more that they get touches on the ball, the more passion they have for the game. I think those are the kids that are gonna take a jump to the next level. And I think that's really where soccer needs to go. I think that's where it is going. Is the opportunity, is really the getting kids together in a less formal environment and getting them to play with one another. They learn a lot of things just by playing, and then also managing the game themselves, because there's not a referee, so they're now owning a little bit more leadership qualities and taking responsibility for other things. So those are the environments, I think, that are starting to build the next generation of players.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, Tom, and I especially thank you for saying that and pointing that out, because you're saying, hey, I didn't get a chance to play outside of formal training hours. It wasn't in my environment, but yet you're still recommending it to other parents because the impact it'll have on their kids. So it's a great point for parents listening.
Yeah, and it's back in the day, the kids were able to just go out and play until 7, 8 o'clock and come home for dinner. That's great, but they weren't when they were doing that, they weren't playing soccer. And now some of the restrictions are everything needs to be structured. They have piano class, they have soccer class, they have whatever else they're doing. But I see a lot in the city that kids are too structured within their day, and they need to play, and whatever that may be. But I see when they do have that time to play, that they're picking soccer, which is great to see.
And so, Tom, did your parents play as kids as well?
No, my father played traditional American football. My mother, didn't play. I don't even think there were opportunities, to be honest, back then. Soccer wasn't a sport that was available to them at the high school level.
So, what do you think made you fall in love with soccer?
It's a good question. I've asked my folks that at times, and I said, well, especially my father. He's a German guy who's very stubborn, and he's your middle class guy who was about football and kids being tough, and soccer was never his thing. I couldn't imagine him pushing me into a sport like soccer. But at the end of the day, he said, when I watched you and saw how much you enjoyed it and how good you were at a young age, I wasn't going to stand in the way. So for them to be supportive of that, I think was huge. They supported me through the process, even though they weren't necessarily, they didn't know the game. On the other side of it, they had a social component to it. So they were able to meet friends through the game and travel with and meet new people. So for them, there was a social component to it. But at the end of the day, they were supportive of my talents and my joy of the game.
So what do you think helped you succeed in soccer?
I think, as I say, there's a few things I look at. One is at a young age, we had a coach, Fred Cramp, who facilitated a good environment. He didn't put pressure on us to compete. I think he taught us the right way to do things as far as technically. It helped continue that spark that I had for the game. So I certainly think good coaching, I think a safe and enjoyable environment, I think supportive parents, I think a combination of those things. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the cohesion we had as a group. So a lot of our friends there was a core group of us that continued throughout. So there was a social side of it that we all enjoyed, and that took us through the high school years.
Tom, going back to when you were younger, at what point did you realize that you could play at a higher level, such as college or in the pros?
To be honest, I never really thought about it. For me, it was just a game I enjoyed. I knew that, we were one of the more competitive teams as we got into probably 15, 16 as players, maybe even a little bit earlier, 14, 15, when players started to drop off. And we started to bring in some additional talent and started competing at some of these higher level tournaments. As a freshman and sophomore in high school, you start to go to some of these showcase tournaments and approached by college coaches, not directly because of NCAA rules, but indirectly. And so you realize that you have the opportunity potentially to move to that next level, which would be college. And it was something I thought about, but I really didn't take seriously probably until my late junior, early senior year. I wanted to be balanced. I wanted to make sure that the soccer side of it, the educational side, and the social side were all included in that process. So I didn't have necessarily the drive and the number one priority to be a professional, but those were things that kind of happened over time.
I want to know a little bit about your opportunity. You said with the Metro Stars, right?
Yeah, as I say.
Who was it that saw you again?
What's that?
Who was it that saw you playing?
Fabio Zambrano at the time, in the year 2000. It was a great year for the Metro Stars. They had some fantastic players. Tab Ramos, Clint Mathis. At the time, Lothar Matthäus was coming from Germany. Thomas Dooley, Mike Pecky, all of them, Tim Howard, all of them were on the Metro Stars at the time. And I was really in the right place at the right time. Looking back, I wasn't good enough, but Tab and Clint were called up with the national team, and around that time, I was seen by Octavio in a simulated game, and he asked me to if I was interested in training. He got a little bit of my background at the time. They were starting a reserve squad in 2000, so I trained with the reserves for a bit that summer. And when Tab and Clint got called up, he asked me to train with the first team for it was about two to 3 weeks. And as I say, at that time they were in mid-season, and I was in the summer going into my super senior year of college. So I wasn't as fit as I could have been, but really the level of play was it was a bit faster than I was used to and more physical. So. But it was certainly an experience of a lifetime. Thomas Dooley and I were competing against each other, and trying to finish against Tim Howard, who at the time was a backup goalkeeper to Mike Amon, who was the goalkeeper of the year that year. So yeah, a great experience, and certainly something I'll never forget. But and you look at that and you say, what if? What if I put in a little bit more training before that summer? What if things would have gone a different way, but at the end of the day, you look back with good memories on everything.
Yeah, definitely. An experience of a lifetime. You mentioned a simulated game. What did you mean by that?
Well, he was trying to recruit for the reserve team. So they brought in, at the time, it was I believe the Region 1 team from USYS for the U17 or U18 Region 1 team. I think it was a U18 Region 1 team. So he was looking to recruit for the reserves. And so they were playing, and I was an intern with the Metro Stars. So there was a number of former MLS guys in the office, and they asked me to play. And he was essentially looking at some of the guys from Region 1. But I had a good day, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, but it also brings us to another point, something that Drew Ducker talked about. Drew plays professional indoor soccer, and he talked about playing how you practice and always playing well. And he said, you never know who's going to be watching. You never know who might be there. And, I mean, that was the case for you. It just happened to be that you got a chance to play, and you did well, obviously well enough to get an invitation, and, it paid out for you. So that was good.
Yeah, we try and tell our players the same thing, and it's not just about who's watching as it relates to college scouts or professional scouts, but it's also about the community. And for us as a youth club, we want to make sure we're representing our community all the time, whether it be on the field wearing their jersey or off the field. So as far as the level of training, the intensity of training, but also how you carry yourself. As a former college coach, I would sit on the sidelines and, we would be looking for talented players, of course, but we would also be looking at their demeanor. During halftime, were they engaged in the conversation? Were they being the leader there? If something went wrong during the game, how did they cope with adversity? So, as you say, just to kind of jump on that point, people are watching all the time, but they're also watching not just you as a player, they're also watching some of the other attributes for you as a person.
Well said, Tom. Excellent point for kids listening and for parents to give advice to their kids. So let's stay on your development as a player and your journey as a player. Give me an example of when you struggled as a player, and what did you learn from that experience?
Well, I think I was never the. I'm 5'6". I say 5'6". I'm probably 5'5.5", but I always round up. So I think physically, when you're in that age where you're growing, 13, 14, 15, there's a difficult time, especially for kids that don't have the strength or the size. And for me, that was a challenge and an obstacle. And those were times where, when I was younger, I had the skills and was able to compete. And during that time frame, the stronger, faster people were standing out a bit. But I think, with coaches that understood that the developmental aspect of that, it was never really exposed. And although there were times where I wasn't able to compete at the level I could have, I focused on the technical aspect of it. I focused on the being smart and being able to, from a tactical standpoint, understand the game a bit more, probably better than some of the bigger guys. And so that was how I was able to navigate through some of those challenges. So I think certainly that was one aspect. I think also injuries. I've gone through a number of injuries as I got older, and I had to learn how to mentally be able to refocus and put in the time that it takes to get back into full strength and to come back better. And I think that's an opportunity when players are off the field, and although there's a stubbornness there, you want to be on the field, you get to watch and you see a different perspective. So any players that are injured, I try and talk to them a bit about, you get an opportunity to watch a little bit, to see some of the things that are going on the field, and now you can be a leader, a quasi assistant coach through that process. So those who are injured, how do you stay involved working with your team to make sure you're still part of it, but also learn a different side of it. So I think injuries for me were some things I had to deal with. I think the size, as I mentioned, going through some of the earlier years, and so the number of things you go through that you learn from, and sometimes you take the wrong direction, and you have good mentors that are able to bring you back to reality.
A great point. You mentioned even as you were injured, you were still continuing to learn and continuing to develop. So you didn't let that stop you from developing. So I think that's a great takeaway for players. So now let's go to the other end of the spectrum, Tom, and tell me about a time when you felt really, really proud, maybe one of your proudest moments as a player.
My proudest moment as a player is probably my senior year with the club team, and we won the state championship. And it was a time where, as I say, the year before we lost to the team in the state finals, a team that was probably more talented than us. They had some big-time D1s and some pros that went in the MLS, Dima Kovalenko and a few others. They beat us the year before, and so for us that was a goal for us. And I remember the feeling still in the 11th PK overtime, winning that game. So that's a lasting memory for me that I shared with our teammates. And it certainly says something I'll never forget. I also remember though some of the trips that we took, and as I say, the Surf Cup, the USA Cup. We had some fun times with my with my club, and I think those memories are more fonder than some of the other things I had in college and even beyond as a player, because those players, those guys are friends, throughout since 5-6 years old. So I think for me to be able to have that experience was great. We certainly made plenty of friends in college, and and had some great experiences. So that was one and a few that I remember.
Wow, you said 11 PKs. Did you make yours?
I was the fifth, right? And I didn't realize, because I think there was so much pressure that if I missed, we would have lost. But I think it was, you zone out all that stuff and you look at what you need to do and you put the ball away. But yeah, it was pretty crazy. I don't think I've ever seen PKs go to 11, and actually our goalkeeper was the one who scored the winning goal.
Oh wow!
And it was a 6'4" African American goalkeeper in a suburban team full of white guys. And needless to say, he celebrated and we joined him.
Yeah. So, Tom, we've discussed about your journey as a player, and now I want to get to your journey as a coach. And you mentioned a little bit about where you started coaching. I think it was at your alma mater, right?
I did, yeah. Actually, before that, in high school, I was asked and fortunate enough to coach at West Point summer camps. So each summer in high school, I would stay 2 to 3 weeks at a residential camp, which still happens every summer at West Point, and that was really my entry point for coaching. After playing, I would come back during my college summers and do it as well. But my real experience as far as teams was a graduate assistant position at my alma mater at SUNY Cortland, and coached there as an assistant for the varsity, and I helped start the club team. So that was my starting point. Then I went on to East Stroudsburg University on another graduate assistantship in sports management, and was the assistant coach there studying sports management. Again, learning really the college environment, being still just out of college, it was an interesting dynamic where you're some of the guys that are playing on the team are older than you, but you learn from a different perspective, and I've learned from some great coaches. At SUNY Cortland, Frank Deshan was the head coach, who is now in Germany, worked for the Federation in Germany, and has done some amazing things over there. He's the head of ODP Europe, so I learned a lot working for him. And then at East Stroudsburg, Jerry Sheska, who infamous coach in the U.S., Division II, probably the most decorated coach there is in college, and he retired a few years back. So two really great starts for me at the college level. Finishing up my grad work at East Stroudsburg, what's next? And you think, okay, so I'm finally done with school. What am I going to do? And certainly, college coaching was an area that I really was looking to pursue. I had a few opportunities. One being the head coach at a Division II school called St. Andrews College, a very small private school in North Carolina. Being 23 at the time, was the youngest head coach in the country in Division II, and was a great experience, but a challenging one certainly. Our first year we were 1-15. We had about 13 players on our roster. I was recruiting from the cafeteria to try and fill my roster at that point. And as they say, I wasn't used to losing. Being a coach wet behind the ears, it was a tough year. But we had some good kids. When I say good kids, they understood the process. They understood that it was going to take time to develop, and really worked hard that year to try and recruit and bring in some quality student athletes. We went from last, which was 13th in the conference, to 5th my second year. So I was there for 2 years at North Carolina, St. Andrews. I worked with the North Carolina Olympic Development Program down there. And for me, those 2 years were really telling because it really saw that I wasn't learning as much as I should have. I was still very young, and I wanted to gain more experience learning from others. So I took an assistant position at NC State on the women's side, just to get more experience on the girls' side. And I also worked with a club called Castle out of Raleigh. Castle's one of the top clubs in the country. About 13,000 kids participate in the club, from rec to travel to adults. And I learned a tremendous amount there from the directors, from the staff, and really got to understand youth development more. It was really my first time understanding what it takes to develop youth players, more of the technical aspect of the game. And for me, I was a physical education major, going through my bachelor's degree. So I saw really more of a teaching moment working with youth. And at that point, I felt that was really the career path I wanted to take, was working with youth players and youth development. So I was kind of worked my way up back to New York and was an associate sports director at Asphalt Green and the director of soccer, overseeing the youth club there. Really worked with some great people, and was able to see a program develop. We started pretty small with about 6 travel teams, and when I left in 2008, there was 22 boys and girls. I thought, in New York City, there's not many girls programs out there, and we were very about growing and developing the girls side as well. And we had a director, Lisa Grief, who really was able to take the girls side to another level. Worked plenty of camps, a number of camps, and worked with lots of clubs at the youth level, ODP, etc. And took the position of general manager at Dusk 2 years ago. So I've been there since.
And tell us a little bit more about Downtown United Soccer Club.
Oh, wow.
Your position there is a general manager,
yeah,
correct? How is that different from director of coaching or technical coach or technical director?
I think a lot of it, there's a lot of different names out there. I think a lot of it is just the expectations and the implementation. So for me, a lot of it is more on the operational side, where I tried to bring Dusk was mostly parent-driven as it relates to the organization, volunteer-based, with the exception of the coaches that were hired part-time as professionals. As the club began to grow to a point where the volunteers didn't have many were parents who kind of grew out of the game, their kids left, so there wasn't consistency as it relates to the infrastructure of the organization. And the board felt that it was important that they brought in someone who had a good soccer background, but also understood management and education, and can bring the soccer side together and make it more of a professional run organization, from the marketing approach to the HR, human resources, to scheduling and fundraising, sponsorships, and obviously managing our directors, our technical directors, and our directors of coaching. So trying to bring all the elements of any organization together and make sure that we provide consistency for our players and our community.
So, Tom, let's talk about player development. We've obviously shared your journey as a player. Now let's talk about what you're doing to develop players today. What do you think is something parents should be doing to develop players?
Well, let me say, I think I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of different coaches. I don't think there is a magic bullet out there. This is, I think, some of the things that I'll talk about is my perspective and some of the experiences I've had. But I know there are many others that have different ways of doing things, and certainly respect that. But from my perspective, I think, and what we're doing at Dusk, is really, I think what we talk about is zone one, and it's a phrase used in U.S. soccer which defines ages 6 to 12. And I think what Dusk has done a fantastic job with, and this is prior to me coming here, is building the culture at that early age, building the passion for the kids we talked about earlier that really, really love the game. And to do that, we've put them in a non-stress environment. So our kids, which is a lot different than most clubs, don't play in leagues until U12. So we started as early as most, 4, 5, 6, 7. But starting at U7, we have a player pool that through tryouts of about 40 players, and those players are identified not just by their physical talent, but also by we look at, is this kid, does he pay attention? Does he have, does he have a really desire for the game, or is it just forced upon him by his parents? So that entry point is important for us. And as I say, they don't play in leagues, so they train twice a week for an hour and a half with our professional coaches. And on the weekends, we scrimmage internally. So we'll play 4v4 at U7, U8, U9. We introduce 6v6, U9 and 10, and then we go to 8v8 at a U11 and to U12. And so again, for us, it's about controlling the environment, not just the practices, but also the games. It's not that we shy away from competition. I think competition is important for kids, but it's proper competition and keeping it in perspective. So when we play on the weekends, there's no standings, there's no league table. Many times we'll change up the teams, 4v4s. So it's about them just playing, loving the game, and as they mature a bit, we'll start to take that player pool of 40, and as they get into U10, U11, and we divide them by skill level, and we train them a bit separately at times, but we'll also bring them together at times. So they don't feel like, oh, that's the A team, this is the B team, I'm on the C team. They still feel integrated as part of a player pool, is U10s for Dusk, but we'll start to slowly integrate more functional training for the different abilities. And as I say, it's worked for us, and that's we've seen the transition when they get into U12 and travel. Although some of our teams going in are now competing against teams that have playing games competitively since U8, U9. Sometimes the game format we're not accustomed to yet, most of the time. So although technically we're strong, sometimes we don't always win. And that's a learning experience. It's an educational experience for our players and our coaches, and not our coaches, our players and our parents. Our coaches get it. They understand the developmental philosophy. It's a long-term process. But for the parents, believing in our system till U12, all of a sudden they're now in a game. It's still a message that we have to instill in them that, look, these kids have been playing games for 3 years. Our kids are just now entering more of a competitive environment. So they have to learn how to compete. They have to learn a little bit more of the tactical element. And that's a challenge. But I think the more the club has built this culture, the more our parents have been able to buy into it. And we've had some fantastic results. This past year, one of our players, Jean-Paul Moraine, who just went to the New York Red Bulls this year with their academy, was on the full U.S. national team for U14s. And another player was just called up to the Red Bulls as well. Both of them have been with Dusk for the last 5-6 years. Another player called up with the Red Bulls and was called into the U.S. national training at U14. So we've been able to produce, I think, and develop some pretty good talent. And so I think those success stories help. in the educational process, as we talk about that it's a long-term development, and hopefully we'll continue to have some success. As far as our next phase, U12 to U14, we still again focus on development. That's we want to start to introduce the tactical elements, the physical element, where it depends on the player, but we know that's a time where kids are developing physically. So for us, still focusing on the technical piece is very important. We introduce the tactical piece, the physical piece, and the psychosocial piece, but less so. They get into the next phase of their life, moving into high school. Then the tactical piece, the physical, and the psychosocial become bigger components. And the tactical is still important, but less so. So that's how we've tried to really develop our curriculum, develop our philosophy through the club. We're proud of all the players that have come through the system. I think one example is a video that we shot with our U18s. Our U18 graduating class this past year won the USYS state championship and went to regionals. And that was a team that's been together for a long time. And the video really tells the story of their process of being, not winning at 12, 13, 14, but staying true to the philosophy, keeping technical, and then seeing that they're really, when one of our directors, Gustavo Palomino, who's been with the club for a while, our true trophies are these kids now competing in college and beyond. And him and I went to a game 2 weeks ago where West Point played LIU, and 4 of our Dusk alums who had just graduated as freshmen were on the field. And so that was a good, that's for us. That's the trophy. That's the end goal, is for our players to move on to the next level, whether it be playing college ball or playing professional or being a professional somewhere else. Those are the experiences that I think are very rewarding.
Yeah, and that's something that me and you have discussed before, Tom, about what is more important, winning that trophy, that tournament trophy, and getting the kids ready to win that, or getting them ready for that next level. So I'm glad that you guys have some proof and you can demonstrate that to parents. Do you think that's the reason why it's working, or what's one of the reasons that it's working so well where you are?
Yeah, I think so. I think Zone 1, the focus on Zone 1, the younger kids, putting them in a less stress-free environment, not so much after the end goal of a trophy. I think that's been a huge component of our success as a club. I also know that a lot of teams locally and throughout the nation have better teams than us, but their focus is on the team winning. And for us, the development of the players is most important, and less so about that trophy. Now, as I said earlier, competing for me is very important. So I don't want to send the message that where we don't care if we win or lose. It's about when, and it's about perspective. So as they get older, there is a bigger emphasis on winning, but at the end of the day, it's not our end all be all. The development of the player for us is most important, and so if that sacrifices a trophy, that's okay. Example is, in the developmental phase, 12, 13s, 14s, we have players playing in different positions, and we rotate them. We have a roster of 18, and they're all going to play. And so, there's a tough decision sometimes when you're in a tournament where you're competing and the tournament, you want to win the trophy, and you see it there sitting at the table. But at the end of the day, we know we're grounded in our philosophy that the development of the players overall is more important. Now, when you get to 16, 17, 18, it's a different discussion. But again, as I say, it's where and when. And I think too much of an emphasis at an early age is about winning the game and winning the tournament, and less about the development not only of the player individually but players overall. Too many times I've seen the 15, 16, 17, 18 players on a roster not see any time, and they don't develop, and eventually they drop off and they're not playing anymore. And it's a shame, because I've seen plenty of players that are the lower level of quote unquote the roster at that time that have sprouted at different ages. Whether it be physically, whether it be mentally, whatever it may be, those players need an opportunity to be able to develop, and you need to do that in games. You need to do that in high-pressure situations. And if the club and the team doesn't give you the ability to do that, then that's a waste. It's a potential waste of talent. When I was, we were fortunate enough to have multiple teams in an age group. When I was at Castle in North Carolina, they had 5 teams in an age group. So I saw player movement from the second or third team or up to the first team, just because they were able to play and have time on the field and develop physically, develop their skills, and yet took time. But some of those kids are competing at the highest level, and if they weren't given a chance because the coach wanted to win that trophy at U10 or U12 or even U14, they may not have had that opportunity. So for us, I think it's where and when, and keeping things in perspective.
Yeah, and so what would you recommend for a club that doesn't have the social proof yet? That they don't have those players up there in college yet. How do we get the parents to focus more on the development instead of those trophies? Because they're looking for that. They're saying, hey, that team's not winning. This team is. I'm going to go over there and play on that team, because they must have better coaches if they're winning.
It's a good question, and it's a tough question to answer. I think it's more about, and as we talked about, soccer is taking great strides, but it's still early goings, and there's still a lot for. If you look at the coaches in the U.S. Overall, I think we're still way behind. I think there's a lot of work to do for us as educators and coaches to really understand the technical side and also the understand the developmental side. And so for me, I think it's about the coaches and education with the parents. I think if you have a good coach who gets it and is able to balance the winning versus development and is able to deliver that message in a way that's powerful to the parents, and they see the kids that are really enjoying the game, because if you have a good coach that's able to do that, the kids want to stay with him or her. And so if we have the stronger coaches we have that can continue to say that message, the better. Unfortunately, across the U.S., I think we're still a bit behind there, but we're definitely getting better. If you're in a club that doesn't have those coaches that are on the same page, it's not just one coach. I think when you're talking about a club, it's a commonality of philosophy, and all of those coaches, I think, to make a really strong club and a consistent club, you have to have buy-in from the coaches that understand this process. And when that happens, that's where the education really happens with the parents. And look, even in our club and other clubs that are like-minded, you're still going to have parents that have their own opinion. And as I said earlier, we're not saying what we do is the right way. We think by experience and learning, we feel we have a good understanding of it. But there are some parents that disagree, and that's okay. And if they feel there's another option for them somewhere else, that's great. And I think that's an important thing for coaches to understand is just because you have a great player, I think you have to put your philosophy and developmental approach first. And so if a player and a parent doesn't necessarily agree with that, although he's a great player, I think it could have a negative impact on the team overall. So I think the education of the parent is important, and if they don't agree, then maybe it's time for them to look elsewhere, a two or three parents and players that aren't on the same page can make for a difficult situation for a team.
Yeah, definitely. You normally you would have a technically stronger team than your opponent, but sometimes you would lose at a young age. Let's say U12. That's probably very difficult for the parents to understand. If you're telling them, look, your kids are very technically sound and they're actually better than the other team, but yet they lost. So it's very difficult for them to understand that.
Yeah, it is. Well, sometimes, but I think as I said, it's about the communication and education, and that process happens when they start as an entry point into the club. So the message happens in a number of different ways. It happens for us as a club via email. It happens in person with parent meetings. And player meetings. It happens via our website as far as the message that we put out with our mission and core principles. It happens in our pictures and our video as far as what the message we're trying to relay. So the more they hear it, the better. The success stories help, certainly, as we talked about. But it's very easy to, as a parent and even as a player, when you're in the heat of battle, so to speak, in a game, to forget that. The more we're able to relay that, the better.
And then you've mentioned the videos a few times. Are those on the Downtown United Soccer Club website?
They are, yeah.
Okay, and that's DUSC.net, right?
Yeah, DUSC.net. We have a video gallery there. We're looking to grow it. I think as this age, it's very technologically advanced. I think we need to keep up with the times. So, video, pictures, for us, I think are telling. It helps paint a picture.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to leave a link on our website as well for that, so that anyone that wants to see it can take a look at it. Tom, I also wanted to get your opinion on the question we ask every guest. If you had a 5-year-old son today and he wanted to get started playing soccer, what would you do in terms of development?
Well, I have a 1.5-year-old, and I'm starting to already train him right now. I'm kidding. No, I think it's a good question. I don't know. I want him to be. I think it's important for him. Number one, is it something he wants to do? I think for me, you can't force anything on your kids. And although I would love for him to be in the World Cup in 2026, I have realistic expectations for my children. They have to pursue their dream, and if it's something he wants to do, great. I will certainly support it. And I think most importantly that he's put in an environment that he enjoys, and there's a coach there that understands youth development. I think, as I say, coaching has a massive impact on player development, and not necessarily a good coach at that age doesn't really need to coach much. He needs to facilitate a healthy environment for the kids to play. And so I think for me, if I were to look for my 5-year-old as an entry, that's what I would try and do is put him in a non-stress-free environment, and hopefully enjoys it, and then support him.
Yeah, great. You mentioned the word environment twice, and that's something whenever we ask that question, almost everyone, brings up the environment. How important is that environment, And I think parents need to understand how important that environment is. If you create that nurturing environment where they're just going to grow, as kids, and then develop as soccer players, and develop that love for the game. I mean, that environment is so critical. So thank you for pointing that out again.
Yeah, I think, watching TV too. I mean, this World Cup was great for the U.S. because, people got an opportunity to see the great game, and the passion across the world. And when I was growing up, we didn't have soccer on TV. So to help generate that passion, you watch TV with your kids. And if it's something they enjoy doing, I think that will only help grow the game. And with NBC Sports now, with the Premier League and the World Cup this summer, more opportunities to watch the game, I think it will help develop better players in the U.S.
Yeah, that's true.
I appreciate you having me on, and if anybody has any questions, they can go to dust.net and reach out, and I'll be sure to get back to them.
Yeah, definitely, and I'll make sure that your link is on there so they can go out and visit your website, because it does have a lot of good, useful information as well, and they can kind of check to see some of the things that you guys are doing there, because it's definitely working. So I would encourage everyone to get on there and check it out.
Yeah, and one other thing to point out is, the new MLS franchise, New York City Football Club, is right in our backyard. We are one of 8 affiliates of the MLS franchise, New York City Football Club. The resources they're bringing to the local communities in New York City are amazing. Again, a learning tool for us as a club to be able to get some of the resources from Rodolfo Borrell, who's the technical director at Manchester City, or Jason Christ, who's doing a session today for all our coaches. I think the more we, as coaches, learn from mentors and from people that have been in the game for a while, the better we'll be, because we always need to improve. Again,
thank you so much for coming on and discussing everything with us. We definitely learned a lot from you and all your experience and knowledge that you have. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ernest.
Thanks again for joining us in the Youth Soccer Evolution Podcast, episode number 7. Don't forget that you can find all the show notes at youthsoccerevolution.com. Also wanted to make a quick note about the video that Tom talks about in the show. You can go to dusc.net and scroll down on the left-hand side. You will see their videos. You can just click on U18 Golden Generation video, and it'll take you to the video that he was discussing in the podcast. I could not find a direct link to it, but that's where you have to go. I will also have the links discussed in this show. Obviously, the Downtown United Soccer Club link. You can also check out most of the stuff that Tom is working on and that he discusses during the interview. Again, if you like this show, just reminding you, head on out to iTunes and give us a 5-star review, or any other feedback that you want to give us. I always appreciate any type of feedback. You can reach me at ernesto@youthsoccerevolution.com, or just head on out to the website and send me an email, and I will catch you on episode 8. Thanks again, everyone.